Today we have a crazy story of revenge that left somebody scared to make friends. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my journey through life being a victim of obsessive perversion. I found myself in a real tight situation where I had to choose between my morality and my job. And for a while, I've had to put up with the highest level of disrespect, violations, and probably abuse. But then I always had to put up with every single one, each and every single time. But then you could say that after all those times, it finally got to me and I couldn't handle all of the abuse and maltreatment anymore. And I just knew that if I wasn't going to stand up for myself, no one was going to do so for me. And this was what ultimately led me to take the measures I took in order to ensure that something like this never happened to me or anyone I knew ever again. Basically, this is the story of how I was treated poorly, almost to the point of being violated purely based on the premise of my being a female and trying to make a name for myself in the workforce. I, female 27, for the longest time have always been out on the search for a source of income for myself, as ever since I'd gotten my college degree, things haven't been looking quite positive for me. And the truth is, honestly, things have never been this way in my life. Let us take a trip down memory lane, as I would need to properly explain how things have been going for me from the onset up until this day. I am the only child of my parents, and this has been the case for the longest time. But then again, it wasn't such a bad thing, or rather a bad feeling, being an only child, as there were quite a number of perks that I found myself privileged to have enjoyed. Some of which were the fact that I was always the center of attention and attraction for both my parents, as they doted on me wholeheartedly. It was a really nice time. But then again, I guess some of you would know, but I just needed that time to myself, and basically my personal space. And right after graduating from high school, I made it a thing that I was going to become independent from my parents. But not in the sense that I was never going to go be their baby girl or anything, but rather in the sense that I was just basically trying to live independently from them, as I'd been with them basically all my entire life. And although my father was vehemently against this idea, my mother was the one who I could approach on this matter, so as to easily pacify my father for him to fully accept this idea. Anyways, he finally did, and I was able to live independently on my own for quite a long time. After a whole year of trying to get myself and my affairs in order, I was finally able to secure a job that paid hourly. And with that, I was able to get myself a proper means of livelihood. And all of this was right before I was able to get admission into the college of my choosing. Now, in this respect, it wasn't like I could have taken out some student loans or anything, but then I just felt like the more logical approach would have been to accept my parents' offer to fully fund my college education, as I saw this as a means of them investing in me long term. Even though my father made it very clear to me that he was not going to receive any form of payback for the fees he had paid on my behalf, I still put my mind to it that I was going to do everything in my mind to make him the proudest father on earth. Basically, right after we had settled the issue of payment of the college fees, I had already started as a sophomore in college. And this being a new experience for me, I was basically open to any and every opportunity that was going to present itself to me. Little did I know that I had quite literally no idea what I was signing myself up for when I stated that I was going to welcome any opportunity that was going to come my way, as I could have never have imagined that the opportunity I was referring to in this scenario was encompassing both the positive, or rather the moral opportunities, and the negative or the immoral opportunities. Let me explain in detail properly. So, when I was in my second year or thereabout, there were quite a series of guys that had been approaching me, all on the basis or premise of being friends, and I later got to find out that not only were they harboring perverted intentions, but they were also not of good mind and character. This was a problem for me, as I seriously just needed serious-minded people around me, basically people that could benefit my life in the best ways possible. At the time, I can say for a fact that I wasn't even relationship-orientated, as this was something that I was not physically, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically prepared for. But then, I kept getting advances in that respect, and along the line, I had to learn how to properly identify such people and turn them down right before things got to the extent where I would begin feeling like I'd just been wasting my time all this time. And thankfully, it was working for me, as I was soon able to start focusing solely on my academics, and basically just getting the best grades possible and all. Now this is where things were beginning to get interesting real quick. So, following my steady rejection of every single advance I got, that was seeming like said person didn't really have good things planned out for me, there were a number of lecturers that were in the faculty at that time that caught a wind of this and apparently thought that I would be the perfect challenge. And so they sought out to conquer me. I know how inappropriate this might sound, but it was a legit and honest fact. As at the time when I was in my final year in college, this was when I truly began seeing the physical manifestation of their intense lust after me. There were about 3 different lecturers that were in charge of some of the courses I was majoring in at the time, and I must say for a fact that it was almost as if they were no longer willing to hide the fact that they were making steady advances towards me, and at the time, there was practically nothing I could have done, as I was in my final year and I didn't want to do anything, or rather in this case, offend anyone that would have detrimental results in my final months in college. I got confused at some point, as I really wanted to come out of the situation I'd found myself in without damage to my reputation, person, character, and morality. Till this day, I don't know how I managed to do it, but then I can say proudly for a fact that although things were really hard for me, especially amongst every other one of my peers, I was still able to come out of the entire situation I had unknowingly found myself in at the time. And right after getting my degree, I never stepped foot in that college again, as I knew what was awaiting me were I ever to return. Fast forward a little bit to very recently, when I was already done with college, and the next step I was looking to take in my life was getting myself a reasonable enough work position. One where I would be able to make a living for myself, fully, without having to worry about anyone else, or in my case, rely on anyone else. The job search was audacious, I can't lie. I spent weeks, if not months, searching for a job opening, or even a company, organization, or establishment that was willing to offer me a position. I know for a fact that I was still fresh out of college at the time, but then again, I never could have thought that there was absolutely nothing that I could have done in order to get, or rather, secure a job for myself. This went on for quite a while, as most responses I was getting at the time was the fact that I lacked the experience needed for the position I was applying for. There was nothing I could have done, as I needed to work to get the experience they were requesting. But how could I have done that when I wasn't even given the opportunity to work in the first place? Anyways, although things were like this for quite a while, it didn't remain so for long, as I was soon able to secure a position, out of pure coincidence, and probably luck too, for a position I could have never have thought I would be considered for. It seemed almost like a dream come true, as at this time, it was seeming like things were finally working in my favor and all. Little did I know what was in store for me. So right as my application letter was received, I was called up for an interview, which I went for, and things went really well during the interview too. But the one thing I didn't notice back then was the fact that all lustful and perverted eyes were on me. But I guess I was just too focused on the interview that I couldn't realize this. But then, I know now for a fact that this was the reason they truly gave me the position. A very high-paying one at that. As usual, when I started, I was introduced to every single one of my fellow coworkers, and also to all of my superiors, and from the very first day, I was already acquainted with all the people I needed to be acquainted with. And things kicked off pretty nicely for me. Nothing out of the ordinary really happened during the first few months of my being employed. However, things started to look real suspicious at some point. Well, first off, I realized that I was unnaturally being called up for every single opportunity that came to my department. I know that I was qualified and all, but it seemed a bit unnatural that since my arrival, I was being favored over the rest of my coworkers, and I didn't like this. I knew something was fishy, and also that someone was behind this, but the one thing I resolved myself for was the worst case scenario, which was the fact that someone possibly wanted something from me and was using this to get to me. Thankfully, I didn't have to think or wait for too long, as I was soon receiving advances from most of my superiors at the workplace. At first, I decided to wave them off, seeing as it was unethical at the workplace and all, and I thought that they would definitely get the hint. But this was not the case, as they kept on pestering me non-stop. And this made me recall my past experience back in college, and I just couldn't help but feel helpless. It got to a point I couldn't come to the office because I was scared of what would happen to me if I did. And then I came to the sudden realization that things were never going to get better unless I made them better myself. And so what I did was, after resuming back at work, I made sure to ensure that their actions bore consequences, as I was no longer turning them down, and when they made their intentions really clear, I made sure to get proper, concrete evidence that I could use against them, which could cost them their job. And thankfully this wasn't hard, not even in the slightest. And just like that, I was able to get back some form of strength back for myself, and basically stand up for myself, as for the longest time, I'd been feeling like a victim that needed to be saved. Now I don't feel like that anymore. And even though they left the company, I was threatened with losing my position. Till this day, my position in the company is still very much secured. I'm glad I was able to stand up for myself. So not only am I glad that OP was able to stand up for themselves, but I'm glad OP was able to get away with standing up for themselves. I mean, how many times do you hear stories of women like OP who get treated like they do in the workplace, and it's such a toxic place that them trying to stand up for themselves means they just get kicked to the curb or fired? I'm glad OP was able to stand up for themselves, but I'm especially glad that it wasn't at the detriment of their career. Our next story is, I got back at my girlfriend after we had a 24-hour break from each other. I found out that my girlfriend and partner of 2 years was being unfaithful to me, and this piece of information/moment of realization really broke me, as I never could have imagined that she could have ever done such a thing to me or have been engaged in such an act. But after a not so long period of pondering what exactly it was that I was going to do to her, I decided that I was going to pay her back. My girlfriend and her partner, female 25, and I, male 28, were initially unaware of the other's existence. And this was no fault to either one of us, as looking back now, there was no exact way that our paths could have ever crossed. We both lived in very different worlds, and things were never seeming like our paths were ever going to cross. However, I guess life has a plan for everyone, as at a later date we would definitely meet each other. And this was with the help of a mutual friend of the both of us. I want to give a little background of my life prior to meeting my partner and girlfriend. Let's call her Gina for this story's sake. I was the second son and the third child of both of my parents, and for the longest time, I had rarely received any form of love and acceptance from any member of my family. And to be honest, I blamed them for the longest time. And this was due to the fact that every single one of my siblings were in a power struggle, all in order to see who could secure the highest share from our parents' company, as the company itself was valued at over several hundreds of millions of dollars. I was always left out of the entire family squabble, and this was intentional, by the way, as I never really wanted to engage in a family feud, all over gaining control of the highest share of the company. But then it seemed like I was the only one that truly thought of things this way. At some point in my life, I had already decided that I was not going to rely on my parents' money, wealth, and connections, and that I was determined to make a name for myself, one that would be on par with, if not surpass, that of my family. It was a not so long and arduous journey, and thankfully, after learning some in-demand skills and making proper and efficient profit-yielding investments, I was able to properly lay the foundations for something really important and huge, which would serve as the turning point of things in my life, and also the starting point of things in my life, and basically how things would be going right for me. I guess it's only right that I also point out the fact that all of these were still when I just left home at the early age of 19. As at this time, I was just done with high school, and I was just preparing myself for college. Even though I was already making enough to never have to work again for quite some time, it was still nowhere near enough compared to my goal, and getting a degree was just something of a personal choice, to be honest. Not like I truly needed it anyways. While I'd set up my dream company at the young age of 19 and employed some trusted individuals to run and manage the establishment, just until I was able to come right back to what is mine, I had resolved myself not to make my identity properly known amongst my peers, as it might in the long run prove to be more of demerit than merit. And so that was how I proceeded to college, under the guise of being a regular student, with practically nothing to my name, just to be able to live a normal college life. Moving on, while I was in college, my study major was in accounting and business management. I made quite a lot of friends, most of which were like-minded individuals who I thought to have potential and ambition. In a way, I was using this as a means to recruit individuals I thought would be potentially useful in the near future. And in the process, I'd gotten myself acquainted with a number of people, one of which we became very close friends. Let's call this individual Anthony. He was one of the people I'd met that I really resonated with, as we quite literally had a lot of things we thought similarly on. Things were apparently easy with him, as you could say, that we resonated properly on things that involved academics, and even personal life. The one thing I admired the most about him was his resilience. In every situation he found himself in, this was practically the one thing that made me want to keep him as my friend, my very close one at that. As time went by, we got to know each other more, and I got to find out quite a few interesting things about him, and also about myself. But the one thing that really got me was the fact that he was really popular with the ladies, if you know what I mean. He was really good looking, and he had this charm to his persona, and he could effortlessly, unintentionally flirt with any lady he comes across. I knew this about him, and sometimes I even tried to tease him a little bit on this by telling him to show me the ropes and basically how he does what he does. But he made me understand that that wasn't on his priority list, as he was solely focused on his goals and nothing was going to distract him and all, and I was really envious of him. However, one day, even though I subscribed to a mentality akin to his, I was soon going to regret my actions, as I had come across one of the most beautiful ladies I had ever seen in my entire time being alive. I don't want to exaggerate her beauty, nor do I want to stroke my ego or anything, but then she was beautiful enough to get my full attention, and this was a very rare occurrence, I can say this for a fact, as nothing could have ever gotten my full attention in that manner were it not business related. I just knew that there was something special about her, but I couldn't place my finger on and around it. Then the next thing I could think of doing was asking for help, or rather, advice from Anthony, as I had felt like he was really the one with the most experience of the both of us. Initially, he wasn't willing to offer me much advice on this, as he was really trying to get me centered back on track and focused on what was more important to us at the time. But then this was just the one time when I just needed to get, or rather go, for what I truly wanted. And after spending quite some time explaining things to Anthony, I think he eventually gave in and decided to help me out with her. I was so happy when he told me this, and we immediately went down to what was on ground at the time. He was able to set up a date between the both of us, as he knew some people that could have gotten her to sit down with me first of all. Now, mind you, the truth of the matter was, it wasn't that I didn't want to approach her, it was that I couldn't. Well, the correct thing to say in this situation would be that I didn't have the self-confidence needed to properly approach a complete and total stranger in order to engage her in a proper conversation and all. But thankfully, Anthony was there to help me and all. We met up one afternoon, right after classes, and I must say she was even more divine looking in person. Quite literally everything I had imagined and more. And then, almost like pure coincidence, her name was Angela, but I named her Gina. I just kept getting more and more interested in her. Anyways, we got into a really deep and intellectual conversation about a lot of things, and I got to find out quite a lot about her too. Some really interesting things that I never would have guessed. But then, basically after our first meeting, it was almost certain that we were going to see each other again, as we both had similar interests, and the conversation that ensued between us both was really one that needed to be continued at a later date. And that was what we did. We rescheduled, and things were going really well between us. Anyways, follow the passage of the next few weeks, I got to find out that she was really interested in me, as much as I was in her, as we both had invested quite a lot of time in each other. And when I got to the point where it was already visibly clear that the emotions I had for her were genuine, I decided to come clean about how I felt about her, and she opted to do the same. And I must say, that was really the turning point of my entire life. With her, that is. From this point onwards, we both could not get enough of each other. We were inseparable from the very moment we both decided that we wanted to get into a relationship with each other. Bottom line of everything was that right after we had both come to terms with the fact that our feelings were existent between the both of us, it just made things all the more easier for the both of us. Now here comes the interesting bit. Now we both were together for a sum total of 2 years, and as at the time where I was in the final year of my college, she too was in her final year, and this came with lots of challenges for the both of us. For me, it was just challenges with time and meeting up with deadlines and all while trying to oversee activities of my company secretly. And then for Gina, it was a matter of financial challenges. From the very beginning, I had already resolved myself not to make the fact known of my family's background or even of my personal life and all, and so I had to feign inability to provide exactly what she wanted at the time. But this didn't change the fact that I still tried to support her as best as I could. But this was always proving to be a problem for the both of us, as she had seriously high expectations, some of which seemed excessive, but I couldn't say anything about it. However, one day we got into a really heated argument about the entire thing, and this led us to having our first real fight. And we had a 24-hour break where we both took time to ourselves to basically think and reflect on everything that was said and done. I thought this was a reasonable enough mechanism in order for us to grow as a couple. I thought wrong, as within this 24-hour break we had, she had more escapades and was involved with more of the opposite gender than I have in my entire life. And I only found out when I was coming back home that very night with Anthony, where she was being taken back to her place by 2 other guys she had passed out. And when I asked them, they simply asked if I wanted to have a go at her too, as they had fun all night. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In just the 24-hour break we had, she had developed behaviors that were unsightly. I couldn't just believe what she had done, but I was even more hurt because I truly liked her. But I guess as much as I love a person, I can also hate a person that much, as I was really planning on making her regret her actions, and I knew the best way to do so. And so, the next day, I came out about who I truly was, who my folks were and all. A large number of people couldn't believe it, but the one person that kept hitting up my phone nonstop was Gina. And I didn't give her the benefit of an explanation, as I felt like the regret hitting her was more than enough. I mean, hey, this whole thing is between OP and them, and honestly, I still get even after all that, they probably wouldn't want to get back with Gina, but the way those guys were acting in the circumstances, I don't know if Gina was really actually into that idea. I mean, it sounded like flat out assault to me. This next story is why I am scared to make friends. I had this weird experience with a girl I met in high school. We were in our last grade, and I thought indulging myself in a little friendship wouldn't hurt. I felt this because I'd been a loner for the majority of my college days. It took some effort to have me interact with others, and soon enough, a lot of people began to leave me to myself. To be honest, I didn't think I cared so much about building a close affinity with others, but this particular girl was so bent on being friends with me. Well, not to sound proud, I've always had this tendency to play a queen bee because of how people rally around me. There was something about me that drew people to me like a magnet, and I used to think it was because they knew that my father was a wealthy man. Yeah, talking about my father, he was the type of dad who always wanted people to know that we were rich and influential. As much as I found that a sweet thing from him, I also didn't buy into such indulgence. I just wanted to be my person. By being my person, I mean calm, collected, and a person who keeps my business to myself. But how do I do that when I get dropped off at school in the latest Tesla car every school day? I know some of my fellow students gasp for air when they see the luxury my father wanted them to see, and to be honest, that made it even more difficult to keep a real friend, because I didn't know who was coming for my money or my Tesla. With such money and influence, I led a boring life because of the way I reasoned. Soon enough, I decided to act carefree and just allow myself to feel the warmth of friendship. After trying very hard to make me endorse her, this girl, let's call her B, finally got my attention. B was also a girl who was well known for her high level of ostentatious lifestyle. I mean, she practically embodied the life of a cute, petite baddie who wasn't scared to show that she had access to luxury. According to the information I got, her father was an oil and gas business tycoon, and he was among the many who were making waves around the city. Well, it was easy to feel that B wasn't coming for me because of my father's money. At least, it was obvious that hers got his, so we started building something great together. She was always in my space, and I tried as much as I could to be in hers. I had to beg her to take it easy on me because I wasn't used to having someone so close to me. She had laughed at me when I said this. That was the absolute truth, and I wasn't trying so hard to exclude myself from people. An experience my only brother had at a tender age made me develop a phobia of friendship. When we were in elementary school, my brother was very fond of entertaining people, maybe because of how special they made him feel. He had a different circle of friends, even though it was so difficult for me to comprehend how he pulled that off. And one of the circles he belonged to encouraged him to be a part of the terrible plot that wasn't very clear to him. Unfortunately, his decision to follow suit without asking questions would expose him to trouble. They went ahead to bully a boy who was mostly known for his quietness and calmness. They wanted him to be a part of their group, but he was a boy who liked to stay on his own. In a bid to tame him, they decided to bully him one day. One of them slapped him and pushed him to the floor, and another told my brother to hit him as well. My brother couldn't, and I think he owed that to the way we were raised. My father ensured that we never hid under the security of affluence to become troublesome children, a trait for which I will always be grateful that he instilled in us. Days later, it became news that a certain boy had been bullied and that all the perpetrators would not be left unpunished. However, the plot twist happened when the other boys tried to push all the blame on my brother because they felt his involvement wouldn't bring severe punishment to them since our father was well known. Thankfully, the bullied boy spoke up when it was needed the most. He made it clear that my brother did nothing to him and that he was the one who rescued him and made sure he was freed. That was what exonerated my brother from being expelled from that school. All the other boys were expelled, and I can't tell how many years it took for my brother to allow himself to trust other kids again. That was the experience that shaped me and turned me into a loner, because no matter how much I tried to let go, I couldn't shake off the possibility of having a friend who only wanted to use me. However, B was trying so hard to show me that she could be trusted, and for once, I also decided to cut myself some slack. In no time, she began to ride with me in my father's Tesla, and I also wanted to ride with her in the exotic cars that dropped her off at school. There were days that I picked her up from home and also had her dropped off at home. We would giggle together like free kids who had no single care in the world, and I would see how my driver occasionally stole glances at us. I don't know, but I felt he was envious of us. B was the one who taught me how to spend the money I had. We went to exotic restaurants every other weekend to chill. At least that was what we called it. To be honest, B was truly that girl, and I truly admire the way she easily had her way with people. We became so close that I was so grateful that I gave our friendship a chance. Although I could tell other students who had tried to win my heart were jealous of our relationship, I even had people walk up to me that said I had no idea who I allowed into my space. At different times, different students said unpalatable things about B. Well, I took it that they were trying so hard to get in between us, and I promised not to allow it. We were planning a vacation together when I noticed something had been happening that I didn't pay attention to. I've noticed that some of my stuff has gone missing, but I easily attribute such disappearances to my carelessness. I had that weird habit of dropping my stuff randomly and having to search for it in every possible place later on. There were times I got lucky to find that stuff again, and there were times I didn't. So I had attributed the incessant loss of things to my attitude, until I realized that I couldn't find the bracelet my mom gave me before she moved away to another city after a messy divorce with my dad. I mostly wore the bracelet on special occasions because, for some reason, I wanted to keep the bracelet away from every other person. It was so personal to me and I'd spent so many years protecting it. Just like that, I realized that I couldn't retrieve my bracelet from the safe place I kept it. First, I couldn't say my room keeper had taken it because she had cleaned and tidied my room for some years, and she had never given me the vibe that she was a thief. On different occasions, she had ensured that my stuff was properly kept. I thought about B. I wondered if she might have taken it unknowingly. It could happen, but I brushed the thought off. I just didn't want to think that she would take my stuff mistakenly. Besides, she was rich enough to afford whatever she wanted to get. Eventually, B and I took some time off for our summer vacation. It was everything I had anticipated, except that I was absent-minded half the time. I thought about how I would retrieve the bracelet my mother gave me, and I felt worse when I remembered that my mother told me to keep it safe because it was a family treasure. I opened up to B about my plight, and I could see the change in her countenance, even though she sounded so sympathetic. She told me I should snap it off and that we could go to a jewelry store to get another one if I so wanted to have a new bracelet. At that point, I lost interest in trying to discuss the bracelet any longer, and I was so thankful when our scheduled time for the vacation came to an end. I went back home only to discover that I couldn't find some items of mine. At that point, I knew something strange was happening, and I couldn't help but review whatever I had going on with B. I also tried to remember the day I discovered that my bracelet had gone missing. I remember that B had visited me some days earlier, and I had left her alone in my room to get something in the kitchen. It was difficult for me to add the dots, but I knew the dots were certainly adding up. Some of my expensive dresses were also missing, and I had not been with any other person. It was a difficult decision, but I just needed to find out who B was. While I didn't make her feel that I was suspecting anything, I also tried to be so watchful around her. I didn't know if my decision to visit her at home during that ordeal was a good idea, but I decided to try it anyway. The day I did that, I insisted that we should be dropped off at the house after school. She obliged, and I could see the joy on her face because she loved it when I visited her. Because the visit wasn't planned, I think B didn't have a chance to tidy her closet appropriately. We were used to checking out each other's closets, so it was easy for me to barge in as soon as we got into her home. Right there on her dressing table was my bracelet. Bare and unprotected, if I must say. She was trying to fix us a light drink when she got in and saw me holding onto something I had never left unprotected since my mother handed it over to me. In her eyes, I could see shock and maybe shame. I didn't know what to say, so she simply said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take what's yours." I didn't need to ask her if she took the gowns that went missing after the vacation or if she had took all the other stuff I'd lost in recent times. As I walked away, I didn't know what to think. She had everything she needed, yet she still came for my things. I could forgive her if she was a kleptomaniac, but what I couldn't forgive was how she tried to trivialize my pain. Back in school, a lot of students could see that something was no longer right between B and me. I could tell that some people gave me that "I told you" kind of look. Well, for me, I knew whatever friendship I experienced with B was over. I walked away on B, and I made sure our paths never crossed again. It's honestly surprising what some people will stoop to, even when they have just about anything they could ever desire. Like OP said, I don't know if B is a kleptomaniac, or it's some weird condition where because they're given everything they've ever wanted in life, somebody having something that is solely theirs and they cherish, they want to take that so they can also have it for themselves and nobody else can feel special apart from her. Whatever it was, needless to say, best for OP to walk away. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.